Welcome to the Amazing Authorities Podcast, where game changers, visionaries, and category leaders share how they built their brands, platforms, and global influence. Your host is Mitch Carson, international speaker, media strategist, and creator of the Instant Authority System. If you're ready to learn from those who've done it and want to become the go-to expert in your space, you're in the right place.
Today's guest, John Brink, has an amazing story and a background, and he's 85 years young, and I was given permission to share that. John, welcome to the show today.
Well, nice to be here, Mitch. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, this is called Amazing Authorities Podcast, and you've had an amazing journey surviving. I think you're probably in the rare, limited class of World War II survivors that are here to tell the tale, other than reading about it or watching old movies. And I mean, I want to dig right into that, what that's like, because my uncle, who's been passed for, 25 years now, was a World War II veteran. And what was it like coming out of that environment?
So I was born November the 1st, 1940, and the first thing that I remember is 1943 with bombers overhead. Our family lived in the northeastern part of Holland. It's in about 10 or 15 minutes from the German border.
Okay.
And then, my mom and dad were married in 1938. They were in love. My dad was working in a lumber mill, and they had a house rented. Fairly quickly, they had two kids, a boy and a girl, and my mom was pregnant with me, early 1940s. And then what happened? The dictator Adolf Hitler decided that he should own part, if not all, of Poland. And the next thing was his eyes were on Western Europe. And so Holland brought in the military. And so my dad was called into the army in April of 1940. And the last that they heard from him was when the bombing from Rotterdam. Hitler had decided they didn't capitalize quick enough for him, so he bombed the center of Rotterdam just to hurry them and to kind of give up. And so, in any event, thousands of people died, and for 5 years, my mom did not know if he lived or he died. And
with three kids at home.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the first thing that I remember as a 3.5-year-old was bombers overhead from the Allied forces bombing the northwestern part of Germany, where Germany touches the North Sea, and where all the infrastructure, a lot of the infrastructure for the German army was based, where the bombers were bombing that, and they were flying overhead where we lived, on the way down there, on the way back. And it was hundreds of bombers in the air, a sound that even as a 3.5, 4-year-old, I will never forget.
Wow.
And my mom would take us outside on a flat roof behind our house, not because to look at the planes, but it was safer, she felt, outside than inside. And then in the distance, we could see the sky being red of the cities that were being bombed. Wilhelmshaven, Kiel, Bremen, Hamburg, and all those cities close to the North Sea. And so that's the first thing that I remember. The next one that I remember was 1944, where Germany had decided to cut off all the food supply to Holland. And so, and a lot of kids died and were, skin and bones. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures. A lot of older people that were delicate, in a delicate state in their life, died. And we used to, my brother, my sister, myself would go every morning into the railroad yards with gunny sacks and pick up anything edible and burnable. Reason that we did, they wouldn't shoot us, they would boot us one, but the next morning we'd be back again. And then the next thing that I remember, the coldest winter on record was the winter of 1944-45, was the coldest winter ever in Holland. And we were at a small little room in our house that we heated, and we were sitting around it. It was very hot, close to the stove. On the back, you would freeze. And I can still feel the feeling of hunger, still relating to anxiety and all of those things, and hunger and heat and cold. And then in 1945, April the 12th, 1945, as part of the Allied forces, the Allied forces landed in Normandy in June of 1944, and then the United States, the Canada, and the UK moved into Europe to liberate it, and the Canadians moved north through France, Belgium, the west coast of Holland, and pushed to the top push the Germans back to Germany, and that's where we live. We saw far too much that we should not have seen. Dead bodies, people being shot and killed, because on the way back to Germany, the Germans were very, very easily, put into a position where they were afraid and fear, and they blew up all the bridges behind them, and also a bridge right close to our house. So I remember that part. And then the actual liberation, was first, a lot of people, a lot of fighting, a lot of people, I still remember a wagon that was carried up with a pillow or a blanket over top, and legs sticking out from people that got killed and shot. And
Wow.
so I remember that part, and then obviously the liberation, and it made such an impression on me. The Canadian forces coming in, feeding us bread with butter, and the butter and cheese, and the cheese and the butter was bigger than the bread, and it made such an immense impression on me that I knew that once I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, being Canada.
Wow. 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 Well, that leads to the next question. How'd you end up in Canada? I mean, I guess once the wartime started to heal, Holland obviously is a thriving economy today, but at that time it must have been difficult. And your poor mother, man, with three kids, and your
Yeah.
father never returned. So obviously he was
He
lost
did
in battle.
return.
Oh, he
He did
did.
return after
Oh,
the liberation. So they hadn't seen each other for 5 years, and I had no idea who this guy was, because he was not there, and I didn't know what he even looked like. And
oh
so
man, five
when
years.
he came back with a helmet that he had from the army, and a bullet hole went right through it and missed his brain by a fraction of an inch. And so, but a lot of people respectfully believe that once the war is over, everything goes back to normal. It simply doesn't. It may take generations even now. For me, at 85, I still are affected by PTSD, and I got counseling for the inner child, actually, that had the fear of losing our only provider, my mother, and always the fear of losing her. Got counseling for that in my 50th years,
Wow.
and extremely emotional counseling, but very, very helpful. So what I still do even today, in the last 12 years, coming to the point that you make, there's not so many of me in my group left.
Correct.
And so for the last 12 years, I always make it a point on the Remembrance Day, November the 11th. That week, I try to speak to at least 2, 3 different schools in the region or in British Columbia about what about the 2-minute silence. Why is it? What does it mean? and to share with them, the how fortunate we are, and what will happen during war, and how does it affect families. That everything that is accepted today would change overnight. Everything. And so in our case, our family was never the same again. My dad had PTSD, was never the same again, and developed a dependence on alcohol. Was very good worker, very, very good person, but still never
So he
quite.
did start providing again.
Oh yeah, yeah, very
Okay.
much so. And was very successful actually, but still PTSD never left them. And a lot of people that have been exposed to trauma may not be fully understanding what it means, that it will never leave you again. And in fact, during those days, there was no counseling or reconciling issues. You just didn't speak about it, and you dealt with it in your own way the best you could. And but it changed our family, and as I said earlier, Mitch, is that it is still very much part of my life, even on a day-to-day basis.
Wow. And how did that factor in? So give me the timeline. So you moved to British Columbia and you were in your early 20s, and then what?
As I said earlier, April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army. So I knew that my dream, I was a Canadian as far as I was concerned.
Got it.
And,
Got
and
it.
I would go to Canada, the land of my dreams. Then, taking it forward, academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3, I failed grade 7 3 times. And they said to my parents, they said, what are we going to do with this guy? And some people suggested, send him to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So, and in any event, so I was 12 and a half years old. So my dad worked in lumber. My grandfather was a master carpenter. So they decided I should go get a job as maybe a furniture maker so I could work with my hands since,
Tradesman. Yeah.
yeah, tradesman. So so because some people including teachers said, well, John will not amount to anything really other than being a laborer.
Right.
And so I always thought, though, that I was just as smart as everybody else. And so I had my own dreams. And so my dream then became, that when I was 17, I was going to go to Canada. Then my parents wouldn't let me. I was too young. And then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for more than 2 years. And then I finally decided when I was 23, I would go to Canada and
Right.
build a lumber mill to prove to me that I was just as smart as anybody else. But in Holland, it is this way, is that as you grow up and you get married, or you want to buy a house, or you want to do banking, or you want to get a job, the question is always, what kind of diplomas do you have? Well, I
Of
didn't have
course.
any diplomas.
Right.
And so, anyway, so then I decided in July of 1965, I was leaving for Canada, and I wanted to start with nothing. I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I took very little money. And so I flew to Montreal, and then took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. Can you believe it? Wow, that's a long way. Anyway, so then I arrived in Vancouver, went to the immigration department, and I could speak English. And fortunately, there was a German fellow. So I mentioned to him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. That's where they're building all the lumber mills and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I did. I arrived in Prince George in late July of 1965, came off the Greyhound bus, 12, 13 hours on the bus to Prince George. Prince George, as I said, is in the center of British Columbia, 500 miles, 800 kilometers north of Vancouver. So I came off the bus. I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47.
Jiminy
What
Christmas.
I did have attitude, I've always been positive, even on the worst of circumstances, even in my own little world, and I always maintain that, even still today. Passion, whatever I do, I give it 125%. Work ethic, I work harder than anybody, even still now at virtually 85 years old. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed. I always think I'm late. And so that's still what I do even today. And yes, I did get my lumber mill and several other ones I got. It's not about money, but I have 10 different companies and now I'm a Canadian. And so that's what I do.
Is that your the building behind you? Was that yours?
That's part of my organization. Yeah. That is only
Wow.
one part, so
And
yeah.
where's that, John? Is that in
Prince George, British Columbia, or
okay.
northern. Most of my activity is in northern British Columbia. So we have four silos. The one is lumber manufacturing. The other silo is warehousing, distribution, and logistics. The other silo is real estate, residential, commercial, and industrial. And the other silo is media. And so media, I'm working on my sixth and seventh book. And at the same time, I'm a presenter, in-demand presenter, and then I'm very active on podcasting and all of those kind of things. That's kind of what I do.
Well, have you ever thought about working harder?
So some people say to me, and I don't know if I told you that or not, but I have to tell you this in all fairness, is that Ben, I was not very good at communications. And so even not after I was already here for and then mid to late 1980s, I already was successful, but I was not good at communications. And so an ex-sister-in-law that I had said to me, I want you to come with me to Toastmasters. I said, what's that all about? He said, about communication skills. And I said, okay, are you going to ask me any questions? He said, no, you just sit there and listen to them. I said, okay, I did go there. And then halfway through the meeting, somebody said to me, hey, John, tell us all about yourself. I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. But I did. I stayed there for 10 years and became a distinguished Toastmaster. And for those people that may not be familiar with Toastmasters, it's all over the world, mainly in North America. That's where it started. As we speak, in all the communities in North America, there are usually a number of Toastmaster clubs around, and the same in Europe to a certain extent. There's probably 10 million people around the world that have been participating in Toastmasters. For those people that are not familiar, look it up on Google. And so that's what I did. And so, so that kind of changed my ability to become a better presenter and speaker. And then the other part that changed my life is at one point I picked up a book, in a store, and the book was about driven to distraction. And I don't know why I picked it up. And I have it in my studio. I'm here in the boardroom of one of my companies, but the actual book, I still have it. I picked it up November 1997, after I was already here for 32 years. Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Halliwell. He wrote 18 books. And he's a professor recognized globally on the issue of ADHD. Attention deficit and hypertension disorder.
Sure.
And he wrote 18 books. He is dyslexic, so am I, and ADHD. So I wrote a book about that as well. And so I call it now a superpower. And if people say to me, as you did, are you working so hard? They say to me, how do you do all the things that you do? I said, ADHD. That's how I do it.
I love it. You've turned a perceived liability into a real asset and a separator is how I look at that as the distinction. You mentioned a couple things and I want to comment. First about the war. from the other side, I have an 85-year-old lady friend in Las Vegas, where I lived for 4 years, who grew up in Hamburg.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, her perspective growing up, she's same age as you, recovering from the war. And obviously, she had nothing to do with the German army movement and Adolf Hitler. She was a child, just like you were. And how she was treated post-war and then emigrated to the United States at 19 years old, had to deal with a lot of racial profiling. And of course, the stigma of being German. It wasn't her fault. What one man started, that of course avalanched, and a lot of people suffered from that. But that was one. I thought it was an interesting, wow, what a story of success enduring that. Just many people would use the PTSD as an excuse for not being successful in life. They would use that as their victim story. And is there truth to it? Yes. Not everybody has the spine, obviously, John, that you have exhibited, that you've tapped into. You've really tapped into the strength of your spinal column and used it to your advantage. You didn't use ADHD. It's like no excuses. No excuses.
No.
If anybody has an excuse, you do, as well as many others of your generation. But people tap onto their, or grab onto their excuses, and then never succeed and look back and think, oh gosh, had I had it like, Joe Smith, who had an easy life, I'd be successful like Joe Smith. But,
So the interesting part about your comments, Mitch, and about the lady friend that you had that is 85 years old, same age as me, and all my presentations that I do about the Second World War, we were all victims on either side of the border.
Correct.
And in fact, I was married twice. My first wife, she was born in Hamburg. And so, and we got married, I believe it was in 1967, and have two daughters actually. So there was no particular dislike of people like that. We were all victims, and so learned a lesson from that, and as well. So but PTSD very much still part of my life and the inner child. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And so, may I ask, did the first wife pass, or was that?
Well, yeah, it was not related to anything other than, that as you likely know, if I reflect back on it, I have a great deal of respect for her, still be in contact with her and all of that kind of stuff, is that a good comment to make at this particular podcast and others that I've done is that saying, the misunderstanding by a lot of people are, respectfully, that believe that if you're entrepreneurial and you want to start a business from the ground up, from any level up, that they a lot of times have the understanding that what you do is you're primarily preoccupied with planning holidays and bringing money to the bank. That's not so. That, building and being an entrepreneur and starting from the ground up, building companies is extremely demanding on relationships and on people that you care around you. And so that likely was one of the areas that created challenges in our relationship as well, that it is very, very hard and very, very difficult. So it's not a reflection of anything else other than saying that, I worked as 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, as long as I could stay physically awake. And then spending a lot of time building company from the ground, hanging on by my fingernails, going from crisis to crisis. And a lot of people ask me, have said to me, hey, John, you had such an interesting life. You should write a book about it. Writing books is not easy.
No, it's not.
So for 20 years, I started working on a book and stopped and started and stopped. And when I was 75 or 76, I said, if I don't do it now, it will never happen.
Right.
So I wrote this book, Against All Odds. And so, and it's all about the ups and downs. So this book took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And so been very popular, actually, and it's available in all the areas. The other thing that you may find interesting about it is that on the back of the book, I don't know if you can see it, but the price of the book is $25.47.
Oh, isn't that funny?
And that relates to this.
I got it. No, I love it. I love it, John. That's fantastic. I love the price.
Thanks for tuning in to the Amazing Authorities Podcast. If today's episode inspired you, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps more experts like you rise to the top. For behind-the-scenes access and free resources to boost your authority, head to MitchCarson.com. Until next time, stay amazing.